Are Christmas trees pagan decorations? In my last video, I asked the question, did the celebration of Christmas come from pagan sources? And I think I showed conclusively from real historical evidence that Christmas is not, in fact, a pagan holiday. Or at least it didn't start that way. But has it become a pagan holiday over time? Are decorations like Christmas trees proof that we have adopted pagan traditions into our good celebration of Christmas? And if so, have we made Christmas pagan? Now, maybe you're wondering why anyone would think that Christmas trees are pagan. Well, some people would point to the ancient cult of Asherah, which worshipped a female goddess of fertility, and their worship was indeed connected to trees. Some have said that they practiced cutting down trees and decorating their houses with them in honor of this pagan goddess. Furthermore, in the Bible, in Jeremiah 10, God says to Israel, "Learn not the way of the heathen, for the customs of the people are vain. One cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe, they deck it with silver and gold." Some would say that this passage condemns the use of Christmas trees as decorations. So is Jeremiah 10 prophesying about trees used in Asherah worship, and does his prophetic condemnation in this passage then apply to Christmas trees today? I aim to answer both of those questions in this video. Now, as far as traditions that have become part of our Christmas celebration that originate from semi-pagan sources, there does seem to be a little evidence for some of these. But I don't think Christmas trees are one of them. Mistletoe, for instance, was thought of as a symbol of fertility to the ancient Druids. Kissing under the mistletoe didn't really become a Christmas tradition until Victorian times in England. So there's no reason to think that the ancient, long-dead Druids were the actual reason that this tradition became popular. But mistletoe itself does have some history in pagan traditions. Kissing under the mistletoe is certainly not an essential part of the Christmas celebration, at least not in my opinion. But my point is that there may be some traditions that exist today that may have some history in pagan superstition, even though they can't be linked to it directly. But I think we'll find as we examine the evidence here that decorating Christmas trees is not even borderline. It's not even a halfway pagan tradition. Let's start by examining the evidence surrounding the cult of Asherah. Asherah was a mythological pagan goddess of fertility that can be traced back to ancient Middle Eastern peoples, including the Hittites in the land of Canaan, and possibly even the Egyptians as well. For this reason, the worship of Asherah was a real problem for the nation of Israel. They exited the pagan land of Egypt to conquer the pagan land of Canaan. So God warned his people not to worship Asherah. In Deuteronomy 16:21, he commanded, "Thou shalt not plant thee a grove of trees near unto the altar of the Lord thy God, which thou shalt make thee." You see, Asherah, the goddess of fertility, was thought to be the mother of all living. She was an Eve-like character and was symbolized in idols as a woman in connection with a tree of life. Some depictions even have this tree growing from her stomach. The point is that ancient pagans seem to have adopted the true story of Eve, who was truly the mother of all living, and ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the pagans made her into this Asherah myth associated with the tree of life. True stories often become myths when they are handed down orally over many generations. Anyway, we see that the worship of Asherah was connected to trees. They apparently would plant groves of trees in which to worship her, and these trees are often referred to as Asherah poles. That's why God told Israel not to plant trees next to his altar. In Exodus 34, he said, "Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee, but ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves." Now this word grove in Exodus, just like in Deuteronomy 16:21, is actually translated from the Hebrew word Asherah and refers to Asherah poles or trees that were planted in worship of this false goddess. In the book of Judges, the people of Israel rebelled often against God and worshipped pagan deities, including the god Baal and the goddess Asherah. During the reign of certain Israeli kings like Rehoboam and the infamous King Ahab, the people returned to this practice of planting groves of trees to worship Asherah. All of this we can prove, but the question we really need to ask is, does that mean that we shouldn't put Christmas trees in our house to celebrate the birth of Christ? Though some claim that Asherah trees were brought inside and decorated for Asherah celebrations, this just isn't found in ancient sources at all. There is no factual reason to believe that Asherah poles were anything like Christmas trees, except of course for the fact that they were trees. But trees themselves aren't pagan, are they? The Bible does speak about a real tree of life in heaven, after all, and God didn't tell Israel not to ever touch a tree. He simply told them not to plant them next to his altar, because that's what Asherah worshippers did, and he didn't want them to participate in pagan worship. He wasn't suggesting that all trees are pagan. These Asherah poles weren't evergreen trees, and there's no reason to think that pagans ever brought them into their house to decorate for celebrations in honor of Asherah. In fact, that would have been the opposite of the symbolism of Asherah. Remember, Asherah was the goddess of fertility. She was typified by a living, growing tree. Once you cut down a tree, it won't grow anymore, so it wouldn't serve the purpose of symbolizing Asherah. In fact, cutting down Asherah trees is so opposite of their symbolism that God told Israel to cut them down. God didn't want his people doing what the pagans did. Like I said, there's not only no historical evidence to suggest that they ever cut down Asherah trees and put them in their house, there is also abundant reason to think that they would not have done this. But what about Jeremiah chapter 10? Doesn't that passage make it sound like God is displeased with pagan practices like bringing trees into your house and decorating them? He did say, "The customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest with the axe, and they deck it with silver and gold." Well, no. God was not condemning Christmas trees in Jeremiah 10. And not just because Jesus hadn't been born yet when Jeremiah was written, so Christmas trees certainly weren't being used to celebrate his birth yet. But also because Jeremiah tells us in this chapter exactly what he's talking about. And it's not anything like Christmas trees at all. Let's examine together what the prophet wrote. He said, "Thus saith the Lord, learn not the ways of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them." So far, he has warned the people not to be dismayed or discouraged because of what they see in the sky. This probably refers to the tendency of pagan people, when there is no rain or there's a terrible storm in the sky, to cry out to false gods who they think can control the weather. It also could be referring to the signs of the stars, meaning astrology. But either way, this has nothing to do with Christmas trees. Jeremiah goes on in verse 3 saying, "The customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe." Now, cutting trees with an axe is not pagan. But notice the phrase, "the work of the hands of the workmen." This suggests that what Jeremiah is preaching against here is the shaping of idols out of wood. This makes sense because it was prefaced with the people's fear about the signs of heaven. Pagan people fear coming trouble, and they run to the woods, cut down a tree, and craft themselves an idol to worship to save them from the trouble. Jeremiah is calling attention to the ridiculousness of idolatry. Then in verse 4 he wrote, "They deck it with silver and with gold, they fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not." Just because people put silver and gold colors on their Christmas trees doesn't mean that this is what Jeremiah is referring to here. he seems to be speaking about the overlaying of gold or silver onto an idol that is carved out of wood. In fact, he goes on to say, "They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good." Now, nobody would think that a tree in a house could talk or is something to be afraid of, unless that tree was crafted into the shape of an idol and was worshipped as a god. Then pagans might think that it could talk or act or be something to fear. And we know with absolute certainty that this is what Jeremiah was referring to. Because when we read a little further, in verse 14 he continues, saying, "Man is brutish in his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them." Jeremiah 10 is absolutely not speaking about the non-existent pagan practice of cutting down trees and decorating them in your home, because that wasn't actually a pagan practice, and because Jeremiah tells us in no uncertain words that he is referring to taking wood from a tree and crafting it into an idol. This is not about decorating Christmas trees. In reality, Christmas trees did not originate in pagan tradition. From the best we can tell in historical sources, it seems that the practice of decorating Christmas trees began in Germany several hundred years ago, and some traditions suggest that it was Martin Luther who started it. The story goes that as he was walking through the woods one night, he was so impressed by the miracle of the birth of Christ when gazing at the stars through the trees, that he chopped one of the trees down, brought it home, and put candles on it to resemble the stars that he had seen. We don't know for sure that this story about Luther is true, but we can say that Christmas trees did not originate from a pagan cult, and that the Bible does not condemn them. Unless, of course, you have the habit of crafting your Christmas tree into the shape of an idol, and then fearing and worshiping it. In that case, I'd say Jeremiah 10 does apply to your Christmas tree. In the end, even if we'd found that Christmas trees had been decorated and used in the homes of pagan worshippers, I'd still say that Christmas trees are not pagan. Why? Because God made the trees. They don't just become pagan simply because a pagan somewhere decided to use them to worship a false deity. They are God's creation, and we should feel free to use His creations to worship Him and Him alone. That is what they were created for. But like I said, I don't think that there is any evidence that Christmas trees did come from pagan origins. What do you think? If you disagree with me, can you provide any actual evidence to support the claim that Christmas trees came from Asherah poles? Or that Jeremiah was referring to them in his prophecy in chapter 10? Maybe, just maybe, we should work less to find pagan origins for traditions that are clearly used in honor of Christ, and more to actually declare the truth about Christ to pagans? Don't forget to let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't let anyone stop you from having a merry, Christ-honoring Christmas. Now, before I go, I want to sincerely thank you for watching this video. If you like this content, don't forget to hit subscribe to support the channel and to see more content like this. And follow The Bible Explained on Facebook at facebook.com/The Bible Explained. I really appreciate the support. Also, I want to remind you that the entire Bible is ultimately about one thing: the redemption of mankind by Jesus Christ. You see, the Bible tells us that all men are sinners, and that we must pay for our sin against God for eternity in hell. That's definitely the bad news. But you see, the Bible is all about this one thing: the good news that Christ died to pay the penalty for our sin on the cross. Since your sin has been paid for by Christ, all that is left for you to do is to turn from your sin and accept His salvation by faith. If you've never accepted this gift of God by faith, won't you do that today? Leave a comment or send me a private message on Facebook, and I'll be happy to talk to you more about having your sins forgiven by Jesus Christ.